Lots of folks actually are participating on the chat. Good morning to you, Brad Bentley. Good morning to you, Jody. Hey, Marshall, what's going on? Joe J points out that yesterday was definitely quiet, only 3 trucks loading at the steel mill when he was there. Lots of folks actually making their way up and down the highways and byways and enjoying themselves. Steve says, good morning. It's a wet morning in the crooked letter state of AKA Mississippi. Stay safe, have coffee, get down the road. It's another day and another dollar. And it's another segment of Maintenance Matters with our good friend Kevin Lindsey. You guys know him. We know that guy. We love that guy. He, of course, is the manager of technical service at TravelCenters of America. And, well, we got a topic today that kind of begins first and foremost with learning to actually understand your dash lights. Hey, Kevin, good morning.
Good morning, Jimmy. How you doing?
I don't have any complaints. Did you have a good Labor Day weekend?
Oh, not too bad. Not too bad at all. It's actually nice weather.
I know it was kind of shocking here in New Orleans. It wasn't cool, but it was much less humid, which of course counts for cool here in the city of New Orleans. Like I literally went outside to go take my walk on Sunday and then came back in and told my mom and dad, "Get your books, come out here on the porch and sit here where you don't have to sweat." And they were kind of thrilled about that. This is an interesting topic today because we're talking about after treatment issues, controlling after treatment issues. And you point out, first and foremost, the first thing people have to do, shockingly, a lot of people don't, is actually understand what you're looking at on your dash, right?
Yeah, it's amazing that EPA, a government entity, actually came up with some guidelines for that type of stuff a few years ago, and the OEMs actually abided by it and started putting them on the dash. And there's so many times, even today, and I mean this goes back a long time now, at least to 2007, if not longer. So almost 20 years. We've had these other lights and stuff on the dash. So, but that there is a light on your dash, a malfunction indicator lamp that looks like a check engine light. And there's so many times it gets, everyone says, "Well, I've got a check engine light on. Got a check engine light on." You look at it, it's actually the malfunction indicator lamp, or MIL is what we call it, and a lot of people call it a MIL lamp. It's lamps already in it, but that's just.
Yeah, they make it really clear, by the way. Everybody listening right now, they make this really clear. If you think, well, how am I supposed to tell the difference? I don't know. The check engine light has the words check inside of the light. It actually has the words check.
It does. Just like, and I mean, because they're both yellow and kind of an outline of an engine. And whether it's solid, whether it's just a little outline of it or whatever, but typically the actual check engine light does have the word check on it. Or it may have C on it or something like that. Different OEMs do different things. There's no standardized guidelines other than the MIL lamp has to be the outline of an engine. There's a ISO standard symbol for that, which has been used in automotive forever. And of course that's really where it came from, is because in cars for, since OBD came out in the, 1991, something like that, there's always been what we always call them cars, a check engine light. But it's really not. It's a malfunction indicator lamp. That's what it is. But it means you need to check the engine, right? Well, it's kind of odd the way those things work. But
well, I wanted to ask. That's the question I wanted to ask. And by the way, all of this is precipitated by it and the fact that TA has discovered that 9 of the top 10 fault codes that you guys are seeing in your. We'll talk about this. There was an interesting piece of data that you guys got, and that's what kind of set this into motion. I jumped to the dashboard first because I want to follow up with that. But talk about these findings.
Yeah, honestly, we actually got to looking at our data from all the connections we make across the country, and what we really found is, and it really wasn't 9 out of 10, it was more like 7 out of 10, but we kind of threw some of them out because they were kind of nonsensical codes we were seeing. But so we take those out, and 9 out of our top 10 faults that we see in the shop, engine related faults were SCR related. That was kind of a mind opening for us, because we're like, oh wow, and it don't mean that they were all active when they come in, but it just means, for whatever reason we connected to this truck, and so we see all of this. So it's like, wow, this is crazy, that this many trucks out there have these issues. But when you talk to fleets and fleet owners, they're like, oh, that's our biggest concern nowadays. I mean, other than tires and fuel, that's always going to be 1 and 2, right? As far as costs go, but the emissions and SCR related stuff, where there's problems with the diesel exhaust fluid, with the DEF side of the system, is really what we're talking about, because it causes so many derays. And honestly, drivers can ignore those things, but it will catch up with you. That's the key.
Well,
it will catch up.
I want to kind of play with words here a little bit. It's a silent killer. And the other ones, in regards to tires and stuff like that, you really can kind of see that coming. Now, I bring up silent killer because, along with understanding the dash lights, it really is about literally paying attention to the sounds. I mean, that's one of the first ways you can really get ahead of this before it really gets going, right?
Yeah, and one thing I've always tried when I start talking after treatment, to whether the owner operators or just drivers, that drive for fleets. It's like, look, you guys know your trucks. You live in those trucks, right? That's your life. That's your livelihood. No, and I try to tell technicians this over the years. Drivers don't want to come see us because that means they have a problem. They really don't want to be down. They are not making money when they're down. So, to try to understand all that, when something's going on when you bring a truck in, but there's a disconnect, it feels like sometimes, from a driver trying to tell, a service writer, kind of like in our case at a service provider, hey, I've got this going on with my truck, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, there's something going on. So the more educated you can be about how to explain that to a service writer that's trying to take a complaint to give it to a technician or whatever. Now, in smaller shops and everything, you may talk to the technician directly. So you can converse about, what happened. Well, I was going down the road, this light come on. And of course, as a technician, you got to ask the right questions too, to try to put the puzzle together. It's like a CSI investigation. When did this start? When did you first notice a difference? Whether it was a noise, whether it was some sound you heard. You may have noticed just a slight drop off in power. Maybe you noticed, hey, the last trip I did here, when I refilled my DEF tank, it only took a gallon. This time it took 2 gallons. It's used twice as much. Something like that is an indicator that something could be going on, right?
Let me be a truck psychiatrist for a second here, because this is a long way to get to a question, but I want to see if this makes sense.
Okay.
So I'm going to use your own words. You said that these men and these women know their trucks better than anybody else. They live in them, and they don't want to see them. All right, now I'm break that down into 3 parts here. So because so many of these people have been driving trucks for so long, they have an instinctive knowledge of them, which means they often don't, when they get into a new truck, really take the time to do an in-depth dive. I don't mean that they don't, of course, get comfortable in the truck and familiarize themselves and learn how to drive it to absolute perfection. But a lot of new things have shown up, a lot of new technology over the last decade or so, and really has accelerated. So their knowledge of the truck might not be as complete as they think, and this kind of often prevents them from really diving deep into the manual, looking up stuff online, really taking the time to familiarize themselves with whatever is new. Because they live there, they get used to a lot of the things that are happening around them, so things don't sound as weird as they might. And then finally, because they don't want to see you guys. They often will ignore stuff that's going on and only come in when it becomes to the point of distraction or that the actual situation is unbearable, meaning they can no longer do it. And I'm wondering
Yeah.
if this is one of those places, given that you are a truck whisperer and a truck driver whisperer, if what you're encountering isn't so much stubbornness, but I guess, and I don't want to say learned helplessness, but a sort of learned understanding of like, this is, I mean, trucks break down. That's what they do. They wear and tear. I'm not going to think much about this until it's too late. Are you finding that the acceleration of technology has prevented even those who know a great deal about the things they drive from recognizing the signs all the time?
Well, maybe it's not, blocking them or keeping them from recognizing the signs. Maybe it's a simple fact that the signs are different, than what they
Right.
used to be, right? And that's, to me, that's key. That's where you've really got to understand, what things really are different and could be different now. You know, so much, so much of the after treatment system relies on a very simple concept, and that is temperatures, different temperature sensors, whether on the truck, on the engine, at different points in the coolant temperature sensors, oil temperature sensors, all these different exhaust temperature sensors we have, those and pressure sensors. Two very common sensors that we've had on trucks since electronic engines, in the late 80s, early 90s. So, it's not like it's something new. It's been there. But the technology in the software that actually sees the fluctuations in these different pressures and temperature sensors can kind of start predicting when something's going to happen, and that's that I think that's where we're going in the industry, is this whole predictive instead of preventative maintenance. We may be looking towards predictive maintenance, and that's not really where I wanted to go with the after treatment, discussions, but because we got to know where we're at, right? I'm kind of a history guy, and history in trucking and engines and the evolution of the EPA requirements and stuff. It's one of the things I kind of preach a lot when I start talking, I guess, about this stuff, because I am a little passionate about it. That everybody understands. You got to understand where you came from to understand where you're at now, to try to figure out where you're going, right? So.
Well, no, but I mean, we go back. Look, okay, I'll give you an example. Tell me if I'm listening to you right here. So we talk about the dashboard lights, right? That if you
Hmm.
actually become
Yeah.
really attuned to what you're doing, you actually might be able to predict that if you don't do a certain thing soon, that DEF light is going to come on.
Oh yeah.
And let's
Yeah.
talk really quickly about DEF consumption and then exhaust leaks and then focusing on the air filter. Like I said, there are
Hmm.
that predictive nature actually I think ties really well into after treatment, because the idea is you almost want to get to the point where you feel the light coming on before the light comes on, you know.
Oh yeah, for sure, right? And here's the key, because of the way the EPA writes these requirements out to the different the OEMs, the engine OEMs, and it's all based off of that particular model and horsepower rating of that engine and all of these different factors, So there's a little bit different, fuel trims, whatever you want to call them, in different horsepower ratings, even in the same model year engine and stuff. Okay, so there's everything's not exactly the same, but it's all based off of percentages based off of this particular engine, the way it's built, all that good stuff. My point here is what can really happen though is when your computers, your engine control modules, whatever they are, if it's multiple different ones or a single one, when it's looking at all these different sensors as the truck's operating going down the road, if it notices a pattern that's changed, because these things have so much memory in them now, they kind of look back and it's almost like a little bit of AI built into them, right? That, they're kind of learning. Now they have to be programmed to know what they're looking for in all this, but when they see this pattern, it knows it's already been programmed to know that, hey, if I see, this X temperature is increasing or staying here while Y is down here at these different RPM levels, something like that, it says, hey, that means this part of the system over here is not doing its job right, and it kind of throws up a flag internally on these computers. So when it does that, they have these systems that they call monitors, where it's monitoring different systems on the truck, for a misfire, for this, for that, all these different types of systems. Well, when it's comparing all this, it kind of rotates through during a drive cycle, meaning the coolant temperature is raised, you're going down the road. And when it comes back around to monitor that one again, if it notices that pattern still going in that same direction, it may have to immediately say, okay, hey, EPA, look, we've got this problem here going on, and it has to turn that MIO lamp on. And it may only come on going down the road for just a few seconds. And after it checks it again, well, hey, wait a minute, it straightened itself out. It turns it back off. So if the driver don't notice that has happened during that trip, it's already tried to warn him of a problem. So, back in the old days, there was, and it wasn't that old of days because it still goes on. But a lot of people were always like, well, yeah, my check engine light stays on. I've got a piece of black tape over the dash, for that. But, well, guess what? You do that today, you're going to end up in a D-rate so bad that it's going to feel like your truck is shut down, even though it may not be, and it could be, just depending on what's causing it. But I do know that still goes on today. But yeah, that light come on. It went back off though, so I'm not worried about it. Well, it was trying to tell you something, right? Yeah. It was kind of a pre-warning, so to speak. Does that make sense?
No, it's like the adjustment has been made, but I'm just letting you know we had a problem. Just want to let you know we had a problem, yeah. And for the time being, you're probably okay, but here's where predictive stuff comes in. Here's where preventative stuff comes in. Yeah. You've been told, you done been told, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And another kicker to this is when it does that, if it did make, like you had mentioned, if it made some sort of adjustment in another area, you got to remember all this emission stuff is based off of one thing: air-fuel ratio. So the amount of air coming in, the amount of fuel that it's using for combustion, and those ratios between those two have to be within certain levels in order to meet those emissions requirements. So when it adjusts something, it can't really adjust the amount of air coming in. But let's say the amount of air coming in is suddenly less than what it was. A plastic bag got sucked up into the air filter going down the road. Who knows, right? So now the mass or the amount of air going into that intake is not as much. So in order to meet emissions, now it has to adjust the fueling. So anytime it adjusts the fueling, now it's going to create more soot on the backside. Well, we don't see soot anymore because of the DPF. So, but it's still going to build up. So guess what? Now it's going to need to regen more often. And you may not even notice that it's doing that. Why did it start doing that? I can tell you, most cases, it goes all the way back to that air filter. Because air filters, when I was younger, started out in this industry, air filters were cheap. But they weren't necessarily, I'm not going to say they weren't important, they were, but no, they were always, something that no one had in the forefront of their mind. But I can tell you nowadays, they're a lot more expensive than they used to be. They're a lot more, but they're more critical than they've ever been today. So
I'm laughing about this because in some ways you're actually telling the old children's story of swallowing the spider to catch the fly. I don't know why she swallowed the fly. Perhaps she'll die. But that really is what's going on here, is the fact that just because, like I said, just because you're your overall system is making adjustments to keep you on the road, don't mean you're fine. I mean, that's really what
That's right.
that's
Yeah.
really what it comes down to, and it's why, as crazy as it sounds, the idea. Look, I mean, I don't want to put you out of business, but this is why people, I don't know, have a crazy idea, should actually do a thorough pre-trip. That a pre-trip shouldn't just be
Yeah.
kind of a perfunctory walk around. There are things you got to be looking for, and so much of what we talk about here on a regular basis comes down to that, like what to look for. And all of that is about developing the vocabulary so that even when things that can't be prevented or you didn't see coming happen, you're able to talk to your maintenance provider in a way that he or she understands, correct?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And on the flip side of that, the service advisors for maintenance providers like ourselves, and and this is kind of an industry wide thing. There needs to be more education for them to understand and communicate with those drivers better as well. So just my 2 cents worth there.
Oh no, trust me. I've talked to people not only in your field. I've talked to people
Mm-hmm.
who were in your company who have said, if I could just simply get a couple of my technicians to be able to write a more self-explanatory work order, and if I could get them to
Mm-hmm.
be able to communicate that work order to the client, we would be in much better shape a lot of the time. Let's talk about
Oh
diesel
yeah.
exhaust fluid. I mean, we've already covered some of this, but let's talk about the facts to know. You talked about temperatures being such a large part of this. You made allusion to that. Let's talk about the temperatures that you need to keep in mind. There's certain specific temperatures and percentages that you have to kind of keep in the back of your head, to have an understanding of what it is
Yeah.
happening when things go sideways or to prevent things from going sideways.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the one thing it's kind of odd, but back in 2010 when we first started seeing trucks with DEF, a real quick story here. I had a driver. I was working at a dealership, and one of the salesmen gave this driver, he owner operator, he come in, purchased a new truck, but it gave him my number. So about November that year, after he got it was getting colder outside. Well, he calls me, and he's like, "Yeah, I got your number from salesman, blah blah blah." I said, "Okay, yeah. What can I do for you?" He said, "Well," said, "I got a question here on this DEF. I understand, that it freezes in the winter, and I was just wondering." I said, "Nope." And he's like, he kind of paused a second. He's like, "Well, I was just wondering, if I need to." And I said, "Nope." and this went on for a little bit, and he, finally he says, "Why do you keep saying no?" I said, "Well, you're going to ask me if you need to put anything in it to keep it from freezing." He said, "Well, yeah." I said, "No."
No, let me just cut you off.
I
Let me
said,
just
"No." I
let's
said,
just stop
"Yeah,
you before you
no."
even try. I don't want you to
don't
go through all
don't
the different variety here. The answers are straight up. You
well,
don't need to add nothing, right?
exactly. Because what you got to remember, that system, this SER system on these trucks, now DEF is going to freeze at 12 degrees, right? It's going to freeze, but the EPA knows that. They allow for that with different engine modifications and every engine OEM for different reasons. The one thing that is common is that you have to be able to thaw the DEF tank by engine coolant, which means the engine actually has to warm up, which also means that under certain temperatures, they allow no emissions standards to get the engine to operating temperature, knowing that it started to thaw the DEF finally. So with that in mind, this is nothing more. This whole SCR system is nothing more than a hot rolling chemistry set, and you start
That's
changing
not
the
comforting.
chemicals you're
By
putting
the
in
way,
there.
Kevin, that's not
That's
comforting.
well, that's what it is, though.
Yeah.
You think about it, because it's all about the chemistry in that exhaust gases, and getting all that right. And chemistry is very dependent upon temperatures. So, for chemical reactions to occur in certain conditions and settings, so you gotta understand a lot of that stuff. So it's a lot to it, but the biggest thing to keep in mind is, hey, it's going to let you know when there is a problem. So kind of keep that in mind.
I'm laughing because I don't know if you know this. It's one of those weird, national days of. It's National Day of Live Fearlessly. I can't think of a better way to live
Oh,
fearlessly than drive a hot rolling chemistry set. That just is seems like in the top 10 ways to live fearlessly. By the way, okay, so we've only got about a minute left here, Kevin, and I want to give you a chance. I know it goes by faster than you think. You're always Kevin. By the way,
yeah.
worries. Do we have a lot to talk about here? I'm not really sure if we do. I'm like, oh no. I'll look at your notes and go, we got a lot of ground to cover. Is there an overall thing you want to kind of encourage our listeners to do in regards to after treatment issues? If there's a single way to kind of sum this up, what do we do?
Well, about three things is what I always talk about. First of all, on your pre-trips, look at your exhaust stacks, right? Make sure first of all you're not seeing any kind of soot, and along with that, make sure you're not seeing any kind of white residue as well, which could be an indication of too much DEF coming out somewhere. Of course, soot in the exhaust stack is going to tell you something's going on with the DPF, with the diesel particulate filter side of the system, which they are two separate systems, even though we talk about after treatment as one. That whole DPF section is a whole thing by itself, and then the SCR side, the DEF side, is another one. But kind of look around at that DEF tank, look under that truck, look at that exhaust where your DPF is and everything, where the SCR catalyst is, and if you see any white crusty stuff, coming out of any lines or anything, that's a key indicator of there's something going on. You may not have even had a light come on or anything, but because none of that should ever be exposed, right? You shouldn't see any of that. That all should be going on inside that contained exhaust system. So, that's one of those things to kind of keep in mind, or two of those things. The third one is your air filter. Keep good records. When was the last time you changed it? Have you been through those dust storms in Arizona or Texas or somewhere like that recently? You probably need a new one, just going through one dust storm, because you may not see it, but that thing may not be doing its job.
Well, by the way, that's one of those moments when you're in your cab and you hit by a dust storm. You have to actually articulate out loud, man, when this is all said and done, I got to get my air filters changed. I mean, you almost have to tell yourself out loud in the cab as a reminder when it happens to take the mental note.
For sure.
Kind of do it.
Well, and not only that, but blow the front of that engine out too. Make sure you got everything out of the fins, from the CAC, the AC condenser, the radiator, all of that, right?
Kevin Lindsey, by the way, has joined us this morning. I know, out of time, unbelievable. It's always a pleasure having you, my friend. Go have a wonderful week, and we'll talk at you next week with nothing to talk about that somehow fills up an entire half hour. Thank you, Kevin.
All right.